The last thing Ethan Hale remembered was the blinding headlights and the stranger's scream. He'd lunged without thinking, shoved a woman out of the path of a speeding truck at 2 a.m. The impact had been instantaneous, no pain and no fear, just the quiet realization that this was how his unremarkable life would end. At least I chose something in the end. Then came the darkness, and then fire. Before we continue, please like and subscribe for more support and comment about your favorite character below. Ethan woke to agony that carved through every nerve. His body felt wrong, massive, and twisted. He tried to scream, but what erupted from his throat was a guttural roar that shook the earth beneath him. Trees splintered, birds scattered in terrified flocks. He scrambled backward, claws tearing through soil and stone. Then his vision swam with unfamiliar colors, too sharp and too bright. But when he looked down, he saw fur, black as midnight, and veined with glowing cracks like cooling lava. What the hell is this? Panic seized him. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled under unfamiliar weight. He crashed into a boulder, pulverizing it to dust. A rabbit darted past, and he flinched so violently that his tail demolished 3 oak trees. Memory fragments flashed through his mind, blurred images of a kingdom, knights in silver armor, and a prophecy chanted in terrified whispers, "When the dread beast wakes, the kingdom falls." Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps. He stared at his reflection in a nearby stream, and his heart, if this monstrous thing still had one, stopped. A creature stared back. Massive and horned, with eyes like burning coals set in a wolf dragon skull. A typical monster from nightmares. No. This can't be real, he thought. But it was. He was the Dread Beast of Thornewood, the monster everyone was meant to kill. So for 3 days, Ethan hid in the deepest parts of the forest, terrified of his own shadow. Every movement felt like piloting a machine designed for destruction. When he tried to drink from the stream, he accidentally froze it solid. And when he sneezed, a gout of flame incinerated a cluster of wildflowers. "I'm sorry," he shouted at the ashes, but right then, he froze. His voice. It works. Though clumsy and rumbling, but human. The realization brought a flood of relief so intense he collapsed. He wasn't just a mindless beast. Somewhere beneath this nightmare body, Ethan Hale still existed. But that hope shattered the moment he heard the horns. They echoed through the forest, deep, resonant, and purposeful, the sound of a hunt. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but his massive body crashed through the underbrush like a living avalanche. Behind him, voices rose. "There! The beast moves north! Prepare the enchanted arrows! For the kingdom!" Terror clawed at his chest. He didn't want to hurt anyone, he just wanted to disappear. But the forest ended abruptly at a cliff's edge. Ethan skidded to a halt, stones tumbling into the ravine below. He spun around, cornered. A dozen knights emerged from the tree line, weapons drawn. At their center stood a young woman. She was smaller than the armored men around her, but she moved with lethal confidence. Dark hair pulled into a practical braid, eyes like flint, and in her hands a black longbow that seemed to drink the light around it. She drew the bowstring, her expression carved from stone. "Dread Beast of Thornewood," she called, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "Your reign of terror ends today." Ethan wanted to explain, to beg, and to tell her this was all a horrible mistake. Instead he sneezed. A plume of fire erupted from his nostrils, igniting a nearby bush. The knights scattered. Ethan yelped and tried to pat out the flames, only succeeding in spreading them. "Wait! I'm sorry! I didn't mean—" The woman's arrow flew. It struck his shoulder and agony exploded through him. Ethan roared. Not in rage, but in pain and confusion. Then his vision blurred. Without thinking, his body moved on instinct. He leapt. The ravine yawned beneath him, and for one terrifying moment, Ethan was certain this second life would end even more pathetically than the first. Then his wings snapped open. Weight wings! He glided clumsily across the chasm and crashed into the opposite mountainside in a tangle of limbs and broken branches. When he finally stopped rolling, he looked back. The woman stood at the cliff's edge, bow lowered, staring after him. For just a moment their eyes met, and Ethan could have sworn he saw confusion flicker across her face before the cold mask returned. Lyra Ashfeld didn't sleep that night. She sat by the campfire, cleaning her bow, with mechanical precision while the other hunters snored around her, but her mind kept returning to the beast. The way it had apologized. The way it had fled instead of fought. The way it had looked at her. Not with malice, but with something that looked disturbingly like fear. Monsters don't apologize, she told herself firmly. Monsters destroyed my village. And monsters killed my sister while I hid like a coward. But the doubt had already taken root. Captain Aldrich approached, his armor clinking softly. He was older than the others, graying at the temples with the weathered face of a man who'd seen too many battles. You hit it clean, he said quietly. Good shot. Not good enough. The beast has never been wounded before. You did what dozens of knights couldn't. He paused. But you hesitated before you fired. Lyra's jaw tightened. I didn't. I've known you 3 years, Ashfeld. You never hesitate. Aldrich studied her carefully. What did you see out there? The question hung between them. Lyra could still hear the beast's voice in her mind, panicked, apologetic, and human. Nothing, she lied. I saw the monster that needs to die. But as Aldrich walked away, Lyra stared into the flames and wondered why her hands were still shaking. Ethan spent the next week learning to exist as a monster. He discovered he could retract his claws to avoid destroying everything he touched. He learned that his emotional state affected his body. Anger made the ember-like cracks in his fur burn brighter. Fear made him grow larger, and calm made him almost manageable. Almost though. He also learned he was terrible at hunting. It's a deer, he muttered to himself, crouched in the bushes. Just a deer. I'm a massive predator. So this should be easy. The deer looked up, saw him, and simply walked away. Not ran, just walked. Seriously? Ethan slumped. Even the wildlife doesn't respect me. His stomach growled. He'd been surviving on berries and stream water, but this body clearly needed more. With a resigned sigh, he stood and immediately knocked over a tree. The deer bolted. Come on! A voice froze him mid-frustration. If you're trying to hunt, you're doing it wrong. Ethan spun around, claws extended on instinct. The huntress stood 20 paces away, bow drawn but not aimed. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, clothes torn and stained with mud. You, Ethan breathed. Me. She took a careful step forward. You can talk. Apparently. His mind raced. Run? Fight? Or apologize again? Are you here to kill me? He said. That was the plan. Her grip on the bow remained steady, but her eyes tracked every movement he made. But I've been following you for 3 days and you haven't attacked a single living thing. You've been apologizing to trees. Ethan felt heat rise to his face, or whatever passed for blushing in this form. They didn't deserve to be knocked over. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. The dread beast of Thornewood, and terror of the kingdom, afraid of deer. I'm not afraid, I'm just bad at this. Clearly. She finally lowered her bow, though her hand stayed near the quiver. What are you? Confused, hungry, and tired. Ethan sat down heavily, the ground trembling beneath him. I don't know what I am. I woke up like this a week ago and everyone wants me dead. For a good reason. The prophecy says, I know what the prophecy says. His voice came out harsher than intended. The cracks in his fur flared with heat. He took a breath, forcing himself to calm down. But I haven't destroyed anything. Well, nothing intentionally. And I don't want to hurt anyone. Lyra studied him for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Monsters destroyed my village, killed my sister, and I watched them tear through everything I loved. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but I'm not them. How do I know that? You don't. Ethan met her gaze steadily. But you've been following me for 3 days. And if I were the monster you think I am, would I really spend an hour apologizing to a family of rabbits I accidentally scared? Silence stretched between them. Then, impossibly, Lyra laughed. It was short, almost bitter, but genuine. You're either the world's most elaborate trap, she said, or the most pathetic beast in history. I'm going with option 2. She stared at him for another moment, then sighed and slung her bow across her back. I'm going to regret this. My name is Lyra Ashfeld. Ethan, he paused. Wait, I can actually tell you my name. That's my name. Ethan Hale. You sound surprised. I am. Things are coming back in pieces. He tilted his head. Why are you telling me your name? Because I'm a fool. Lyra walked past him, deeper into the forest. Come on. If you're going to survive, you need to learn how to actually hunt, and you're doing everything wrong. Ethan stood there, stunned as she disappeared into the trees. Then he hurried after her, trying desperately not to destroy the forest in his wake. The lessons were humiliating. You're too loud, Lyra hissed from behind a tree. How is something your size louder than a drunken bear? I don't know. I have paws the size of shields. Then use them carefully. Watch. She moved through the underbrush like smoke, silent and precise. Ethan tried to mimic her and immediately tripped over his own tail. Lyra pinched the bridge of her nose. This is going to take a while. But slowly and painfully, Ethan improved. He learned to move with his body instead of against it, to use his size as an advantage rather than a curse. And when he finally caught a deer cleanly, quickly, mercifully, Lyra actually nodded in approval. Better, she said. You might survive a week. High praise. Don't let it go to your head. But there was warmth in her voice now, the beginnings of something that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't hostility either. They fell into an uneasy partnership. Lyra taught him to hunt, to hide, to understand the patterns of the forest. In exchange, Ethan proved useful in ways neither had expected. His enhanced senses could detect danger miles away, and his strength made quick work of obstacles. On the third day of their strange alliance, they encountered bandits. 4 men had cornered a merchant and his young daughter near the forest road. Lyra's hand went to her bow immediately, but before she could act, Ethan moved. He stepped out of the tree line. The bandits froze. One dropped his sword, while another made a sound that might have been a prayer. Ethan let the ember cracks in his fur burn brighter, let his eyes glow, and he let his presence fill the clearing with the primal dread this body was designed to inspire. Leave, he growled, and they ran. The merchant grabbed his daughter and fled in the opposite direction, not staying long enough for thanks. But the little girl looked back over her father's shoulder, and for just a moment her frightened tears stopped. She waved. Ethan, bewildered, waved back with one massive claw. When he turned around, Lyra was staring at him with an unreadable expression. What? You could have killed them, she said quietly. All of them. Easily. I know. But you didn't. No. Lyra shouldered her bow and started walking. But before she disappeared into the trees, she paused. Maybe you're not the monster I thought you were, Ethan Hale. It was the first time she'd used his name. Something warm and fragile bloomed in Ethan's chest, something he hadn't felt in either of his lives. Hope. They traveled together for weeks, and slowly, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them. Lyra told him about her sister, about the night the monsters came, about hiding in the cellar while screams filled the air above, and she spoke of the guilt that followed her like a shadow. I should have fought, she whispered one night by the fire. I should have done something. You survived, Ethan said gently. That took strength too. It took cowardice. No. He shifted closer, careful not to loom. It took being human. Fear doesn't make you weak, Lyra. It makes you real. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. When did a beast learn to be wiser than people? When a person taught him what kindness looked like. The silence that followed was comfortable and easy, the kind that only exists between people who've stopped performing for each other. Ethan, in turn, told her about his past life, about dying without ever truly living, about waking up in this nightmare body and being given a second chance he never asked for. Do you regret it? Lyra asked, saving that woman. No. The answer came without hesitation. It was the first real choice I ever made. I just wish... He trailed off. Wish what? I wish I'd made more of them when I had the chance. Lyra reached out slowly, carefully, and placed her hand on his massive paw. The gesture was small, but it resonated through Ethan's entire being. Then make them now, she said. You're still here, and still choosing. He looked down at her hand against his fur, so small, so fragile, but so impossibly brave. And Ethan realized he was falling in love. The turning point came during a raid on a border village. Marauders, human ones, swept through at dawn, burning and looting. Ethan and Lyra arrived to chaos, families fleeing, buildings collapsing, and children screaming. We have to help, Lyra said, already drawing her bow. "I'll draw attention," Ethan warned. "If they see me, then let them see." They moved into the village as one. Lyra's arrows found their marks with lethal precision while Ethan used his size to shield the fleeing civilians. A raider charged with a spear and Ethan simply caught it, snapped it in half, and roared, and the man fainted. But then a building collapsed nearby, trapping a woman and her son beneath burning timber. Ethan didn't think. He simply acted. He charged forward, ignoring the flames that licked at his fur, and lifted the entire structure with his back. "Go!" he roared. "Get out!" The woman scrambled free with her child. And the moment they were clear, Ethan dropped the building and collapsed, exhausted and singed. When the dust settled, the surviving villagers didn't run. They stared. The boy Ethan had saved broke free from his mother's arms and ran forward. Before anyone could stop him, he threw his small arms around Ethan's foreleg. "Thank you," he whispered. Ethan froze. He looked at Lyra helplessly. She was crying. Not from sadness, but from something else. Something like pride or wonder, or the shattering of a belief she'd carried for years. Later, when they were alone, Lyra sat beside him in silence for a long time. "I was wrong," she finally said, "about monsters and about you." "Lyra, let me finish." She turned to face him fully. "I've spent years believing that monsters were the enemy, that they were all evil, all deserving of death. But you've shown me that's not true, that sometimes the real monsters are the ones who look human." Ethan's throat tightened. "I'm still a beast." "No." Lyra reached up and placed her hand against the side of his massive skull. "You're Ethan, and Ethan is the best person I've ever known." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I don't want to lose this, and I don't want to lose you." "You won't." But even as she said it, they both knew it was a lie, because in the distance horns were sounding, and the kingdom's army was coming. "We need to move," Lyra said, already packing their meager supplies. "If the army's mobilizing, they'll sweep this entire region." "Where do we go?" Ethan asked, watching the distant tree line for signs of scouts. "They'll hunt me to the ends of the earth. Then we find somewhere off the map." She tied off her pack with sharp, efficient movements. Somewhere they won't think to look. They traveled north into the wild mountain territories where civilization gave way to untamed wilderness. The journey was hard, steep climbs, freezing nights, and the constant awareness that they were being hunted. But it was also strangely beautiful. One evening they rested beside a waterfall that cascaded into a crystalline pool. The sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Ethan lay near the water's edge while Lyra sat against his side, using his bulk as a backrest. "Tell me about your world," she said quietly. "Your first life." It wasn't special. Office buildings, crowded streets, and people rushing past each other without really seeing. He paused. "I lived for 26 years, and I don't think I had a single meaningful conversation until I met you." Lyra tilted her head to look up at him. "That sounds lonely." It was. The admission came easier than expected. "But this is different. Even with everything that's happened, the fear, the running, and the constant danger, I feel more alive now than I ever did then." "Because you're a massive fire-breathing monster?" "Because I finally have something worth protecting." The words hung in the air between them. Lyra's expression softened into something vulnerable and unguarded. "Ethan. Sorry. Too much?" "No." She shifted to face him properly. "Not enough." Before he could process what that meant, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his massive snout. The gesture was gentle, intimate, and it sent electricity racing through every nerve in his borrowed body. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Lyra whispered. "After my sister died, I thought I'd buried every soft part of myself with her. But you—" She laughed, watery and genuine. "You've been digging them all up." "Is that a good thing?" "I don't know yet, but it feels right." They stayed like that until the stars emerged, neither willing to break the fragile peace they'd carved from chaos. Their refuge didn't last. Captain Aldrich found them 3 days later. Ethan woke to the sound of steel being drawn. He lurched to his feet, placing himself between Lyra and the knight who'd emerged from the tree line. "Captain," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the shock. "What are you doing here?" "My job." Aldrich didn't raise his sword, but his stance remained ready. "I've been tracking you both since you left the unit. Do you know what they're saying, Ashfeld? That you've been bewitched? That the beast has corrupted you? That's ridiculous. Is it? Aldrich's gaze shifted to Ethan. The prophecy is clear. The Dread Beast will bring ruin to the kingdom. Every day it lives, we risk that future. The prophecy is wrong, Lyra snapped. I've traveled with Ethan for weeks, and he saved more lives than any knight in your company. Ethan? Aldrich raised an eyebrow. You've named it? He has a name because he's a person. Lyra moved to stand beside Ethan, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. And if you want to kill him, you'll have to go through me. The captain studied them both for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he sheathed his sword. I suspected as much, he said quietly. I saw what happened at the border, village, the reports from the survivors. He looked at Ethan directly. You protected them, and saved them. That's not the behavior of the monster in the prophecy. Ethan blinked. You believe us? I believe what I've seen. Aldrich's expression was grave. But it doesn't matter what I believe. The Knight Commander, Hale has convinced the king that your existence is a threat to the realm. They're marching with 500 soldiers, 3 battle mages, and weapons specifically forged to kill you. The weight of those words settled like a stone in Ethan's chest. We'll run, Lyra said immediately. Get farther north, beyond the borders. They'll follow. Aldrich cut her off. Draven won't stop until the prophecy is fulfilled, and he's built his entire reputation on hunting monsters. Letting you live would make him look weak. So, what do we do? Ethan asked. We proved the prophecy wrong. Aldrich looked between them. There's an archive in the old capital, records of the prophecy's origin. If we can find evidence that it was manipulated or misinterpreted, we might be able to stop this. That's a long shot, Lyra said. It's the only shot you have. Ethan wanted to argue, to find another way, but he knew the captain was right. Running would only delay the inevitable. If they wanted a future, if they wanted any chance, they had to fight. Not with claws and fire, but with the truth. The journey to the old capital took them through hostile territory. They traveled mostly at night, with Aldrich acting as their scout and Lyra handling any encounters that required a human face. Ethan stayed hidden, his massive form concealed in shadows and carefully chosen paths. It was during one of these nighttime marches that they encountered her, Seraphine Cross. The rival huntress appeared like a ghost from the darkness, flanked by a squad of hand-picked mercenaries. She was everything Lyra wasn't, polished, cruel, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness. Well, Seraphine purred, her crossbow already aimed at Ethan's chest, if it isn't the traitor and her pet monster. Stand down, Cross, Aldrich warned. This isn't your fight. Everything involving the beast is my fight. I'm going to be the one who kills it. Her smile was sharp as glass. The glory, the reward, and the songs they'll sing. She glanced at Lyra dismissively. You always were too soft, Ashfeld. Couldn't finish the job, could you? I finished it, Lyra said coldly. I just learned to aim at the right monsters. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Cute. But I'm taking the beast's head tonight, and if you stand in my way... Ethan moved. Not to attack. He'd learned better than that. Instead, he positioned himself directly in front of Lyra, his body a living shield. The ember cracks in his fur ignited with protective fury. If you want to hurt her, he rumbled, his voice deeper and more dangerous than he'd ever allowed it to become, you'll have to kill me first. Seraphine actually laughed. With pleasure. The fight that followed was brutal and chaotic. Seraphine's mercenaries attacked in coordination, using enchanted weapons designed to pierce beast-hide. Ethan fought defensively, deflecting blows rather than dealing them, trying desperately not to kill anyone. But when one mercenary lunged at Lyra with a poisoned blade, something snapped. Ethan's roar shook the forest. He swatted the attacker aside, carefully, precisely, just hard enough to disarm, and placed himself between Lyra and every remaining threat. His eyes burned like twin suns. Enough. The word carried such weight, such primal authority, that even Seraphine hesitated. Touch her again, Ethan growled, and I will show you what the prophecy actually feared. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Aldrich stepped forward, his sword drawn. Cross. Withdraw your men. That's an order. You don't give me orders, Captain. No, but I can report to the king that you attacked a fellow soldier without provocation. His voice was ice. Your choice. For a long moment, Seraphine looked ready to fight anyway. Then she spat at the ground and whistled sharply. Her mercenaries retreated into the darkness. This isn't over, she promised. When Draven's army arrives, I'll make sure they know exactly where to find you. She vanished into the night. Lyra immediately turned to Ethan. Are you hurt? I'm fine. But his voice shook. Lyra, You didn't. She gripped his foreleg tightly. You protected me, and that's all that matters. But Ethan knew the truth. He'd come dangerously close to becoming the monster everyone feared, and the worst part was he'd have done it willingly. If it meant keeping Lyra safe, he'd burn the world. They reached the old capital 2 days later, a sprawling ruin of what was once a grand city. Nature had reclaimed much of it, but the archive still stood, a stone fortress built to withstand centuries. Inside, dust and shadows reigned. Aldrich led them to the deepest chamber, where ancient texts were preserved behind warding spells. Lyra worked with him to decipher the records while Ethan kept watch, too large to fit through most of the archive's corridors. Hours passed. Then Lyra's voice rang out, sharp with triumph. I found it! Ethan hurried back as carefully as his size allowed. Lyra held a weathered tome, its pages covered in faded script. The original prophecy, she breathed. It's been altered. Look. She pointed to a section where the ink was clearly different. The original wording says, when the dread beast wakes, the kingdom could fall, if the beast is met with fear and violence. But the current version says, will fall, Aldrich finished, understanding dawning. They changed it, and turned a warning into an inevitability. More than that, Lyra flipped pages, revealing royal seals and signatures. King Aldrin II commissioned the change 200 years ago. He needed a unifying threat to consolidate power after a civil war. The beast wasn't prophecy, it was propaganda. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. So I was never meant to destroy anything. No. Lyra looked at him with fierce certainty. You were meant to be feared so the kingdom could pretend to be heroes. For a moment, hope blazed so bright it hurt. Then the doors to the archive exploded inward. Knight Commander Hale Draven stood in the entrance, backlit by torchlight, his armor gleaming and his expression carved from stone. Ashfeld, Captain Aldrich. His voice was cold. Step away from the beast. Behind him the army had arrived. Commander Draven, Aldrich said carefully, placing himself between the knight and Ethan. We found evidence. The prophecy was manipulated. I don't care. The blunt words silenced the chamber. Draven stepped forward, his hand resting on the pommel of his greatsword, a weapon that radiated magical energy. Do you think I don't know the prophecy was altered? I've known for 10 years. Lyra's eyes widened. You knew? Of course. The commander's smile was cold. The prophecy's accuracy is irrelevant. What matters is what people believe, and they believe the beast is a threat. As long as that fear exists, I am necessary. Heroes need monsters, Ashfeld. I'm simply ensuring mine doesn't disappoint. You're insane, Lyra breathed. I'm practical. Draven drew his blade. The kingdom needs a victory. I will give them one. Whether you stand aside or die beside the beast is your choice. Then I choose to stand, Lyra said, her bow already in hand. As do I, Aldrich added, his sword raised. Draven sighed. So be it. Kill them all. The army surged forward. What followed was chaos distilled into violence. Ethan fought like he never had before, not to destroy, but to protect. He used his body as a barrier, shielding Lyra and Aldrich from the worst of the assault. When soldiers closed in, he swept them aside with measured force. When arrows flew, he took them on his hide. But there were so many. A battle mage hurled a spear of lightning that punched through Ethan's shoulder. He roared in agony but didn't fall. Another mage summoned chains of pure force that wrapped around his limbs. Ethan! Lyra's scream cut through the noise. She fired arrow after arrow, each one finding a gap in armor, buying seconds they couldn't afford. Aldrich fought with the precision of experience, holding the left flank against impossible odds. But even he was flagging. Draven walked through the battle like a force of nature, cutting down anyone in his path. He locked eyes with Ethan across the battlefield. "You should have stayed a legend," the commander said. "Instead you became something worse. A disappointment." Ethan felt rage build in his chest, hot, consuming, and primal. The beast wanted to be unleashed, wanted to show Draven exactly what the prophecy had feared. But then he heard it. Lyra's voice cutting through the bloodlust. "Ethan, don't!" He looked at her. She was wounded, bleeding from a cut on her temple, but her eyes were fierce and unwavering. "You're not the monster," she shouted. "Don't become one now." The words anchored him, pulled him back from the edge. He wasn't the beast. He was Ethan. And Ethan protected people. With renewed focus, he broke the magical chains and unleashed a roar, not of violence, but of defiance. The sound echoed across the battlefield, primal and commanding. And then something impossible happened. The civilians, villagers from the border, people they'd saved along the way, emerged from the surrounding ruins. They stood between the army and Ethan, their hands raised, their voices joined. "The beast saved us! He protected my children! We won't let you kill him!" The army hesitated. Soldiers looked at each other, uncertainty rippling through the ranks. Draven's face twisted with fury. "They're bewitched! Kill them all!" But Aldrich stepped forward, his voice ringing clear. "By order of the Knight's Code, I invoke protection of non-combatants. Any soldier who harms these people answers to me." The army wavered, while some lowered their weapons. Draven turned his fury on Aldrich. "You dare—" "I dare!" Aldrich stood tall. "Because unlike you, I still believe in what this kingdom is supposed to protect." For a moment it looked like the battle might end without more bloodshed. Then Draven charged, not at Ethan, but at Lyra. Time seemed to slow down, and Ethan saw the blade descending, saw Lyra's eyes widen, saw her bow, useless at this range, still clutched in her hands. He moved without thought. His massive body crashed between them, taking the full force of Draven's enchanted blade. The weapon, designed specifically to kill beasts, punched through hide, muscle, and something deeper. Ethan felt his essence beginning to unravel. The prophecy's magic, bound to his existence, started to tear itself apart. Golden light bled from the wound, and Ethan understood with terrible clarity what was happening. This was the end the prophecy had always intended. "No!" Lyra's scream was raw. "No! No! No! Ethan!" He collapsed, his massive form trembling. Draven yanked his blade free, but there was no triumph in his eyes. Only confusion as the magic that had created the beast began to consume itself. Ethan looked at Lyra. She was kneeling beside him, her hands pressed against his wound as if she could hold him together through sheer force of will. "I'm sorry," he managed, his voice fading. "I wanted more time." "Don't you dare!" Tears streamed down her face. "Don't you dare give up!" But Ethan could feel it, the reincarnation curse reaching its conclusion. The beast form was designed to be temporary, a vessel for a soul that didn't belong. When the prophecy was fulfilled, that soul would be erased, unless. Through the pain, through the golden light consuming him, Ethan saw the truth written in the magic itself. The prophecy didn't demand death, it demanded sacrifice. A willing release. "Lyra," he whispered, "trust me." Before she could respond, Ethan did what no beast had ever done. He let go, not of life, and not of consciousness, but of the curse binding him to this form. He reached deep into the prophecy's magic, and instead of fighting it, he embraced it. He pulled every fragment of the ancient spell into himself, and then released it. The explosion of golden light blinded everyone on the battlefield. When it faded, the Dread Beast of Thornewood was gone. Lyra's scream echoed across the silent battlefield. She knelt where Ethan had fallen, but there was nothing left. No body, and no trace. Just scorched earth and the lingering smell of magic. "No." Her voice broke. "Please, no." Aldrich placed a hand on her shoulder, his own expression devastated. Around them the army stood in shocked silence. Even Draven seemed stunned, his sword lowered. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The beast was gone. But the kingdom hadn't fallen. For a long moment no one moved. Then quietly, Aldrich spoke. "He saved us all, and we'll never even know his name." "His name was Ethan," Lyra said fiercely through her tears. "Ethan Hale, and he was the best person any of us will ever meet." She stood, her grief hardening into something sharp and unyielding. She turned to face Draven, and the commander actually took a step back at the fury in her eyes. "You did this," she said. "You murdered him for glory, for politics, and for nothing." Draven opened his mouth to respond, but Aldrich cut him off. "The kingdom will hear the truth," the captain said, "about the altered prophecy, about what really happened here. You wanted to be a hero, Commander. Instead, you'll be remembered as the man who killed the kingdom's savior." The words landed like blows. Around them, soldiers began to murmur, their gazes shifting to Draven with newfound doubt. The commander's face twisted with rage, but before he could act, horns sounded from the capital. The king himself had arrived. The aftermath took weeks to resolve. The evidence from the archive was presented to the crown. Witnesses testified, civilians, soldiers, even some of Draven's own men who'd begun to question their commander's zealotry. In the end, Draven was stripped of his rank and exiled. The prophecy was officially declared a fraud, and the kingdom mourned the beast they'd feared but never understood. Lyra attended none of the ceremonies. She couldn't stomach the hypocrisy. The same people who'd hunted Ethan now praising his sacrifice. Instead, she left the capital and wandered. She traveled to the border village they'd saved, to the forest where they'd first met, to every place that held a memory of the strange, clumsy, impossibly kind beast who'd changed her life. And every night she looked at the stars and felt the absence like a physical wound. 6 weeks after the battle, Lyra found herself in a small frontier town near untouched wilderness. She'd been traveling, without direction, without purpose, just trying to outrun the grief that followed her like a shadow. She was sitting in a tavern nursing a drink she had no intention of finishing, when someone sat down across from her. "Excuse me," a male voice said. "Is this seat taken?" "Yes," Lyra replied without looking up. "Oh, sorry, I'll just—" Something in the voice made her pause. Lyra looked up. The man across from her was young, maybe mid-20s, with kind eyes and dark hair that fell into his face. He wore simple traveling clothes and had the uncertain posture of someone still getting used to their own body. Their eyes met, and Lyra's breath stopped. "I know this is going to sound strange," the man said, his voice trembling. "But have we met before? You seem incredibly familiar." Lyra stared at him, at the way he tilted his head, at the gesture he made when he was nervous, running his hand through his hair, at the exact shade of his eyes. "What's your name?" she whispered. "I don't know." He laughed awkwardly. "I woke up in a healer's house 3 weeks ago with no memory. They said I was found unconscious in the mountains. The healer named me Marcus, but it doesn't feel right. Nothing feels right except—" He stopped, staring at her intently. "Except you," he finished quietly. "You feel right." Lyra's hands shook. "Say something only he would know. Something personal." The man frowned, confused. "I don't understand. I don't have any memories. I can't—" Then his expression shifted, like something had clicked into place. "The stars," he said slowly, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep. "You told me once that your sister used to count them with you, that after she died, you couldn't look at the night sky without crying." Lyra's vision blurred with tears. "And I promised," he continued, his own voice breaking, "that if you let me, I'd help you learn to love the stars again." Ethan. The name was a sob, a prayer, a miracle. "Lyra?" He stood up so fast his chair fell over. "Is that... am I—" She was across the table before he could finish, her arms around him, shaking with sobs that were half grief and half joy. "It's you," she gasped. "It's really you." Ethan, Marcus, whoever he was, wrapped his arms around her like she was the only solid thing in the world. "I don't understand. I don't remember everything, but I remember you. I've been looking for you. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I kept moving because something told me I'd know when I found it. You're human." Lyra pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands framing his face. "You're human. Is that bad?" "No." She laughed through her tears. "It's perfect. You're perfect." They stood there in the middle of the tavern holding each other while confused patrons looked on. Neither of them cared. "I have so much to tell you," Lyra said, "about who you were, about what you did. I want to know everything." Ethan, because that's who he was, who he'd always been, smiled at her with that same gentle kindness she'd fallen in love with. "But first, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Will you stay with me?" I don't know who I am yet, but I know I don't want to figure it out without you." Lyra kissed him. It was everything their first life together couldn't be. Soft and warm and achingly human. When they finally broke apart, both were crying. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "Never again." They built a life slowly, carefully, learning each other all over again. Ethan's memories returned in pieces, fragments of his beast life mixing with his human one, creating something new. He remembered the battles, the fear, the impossible love. But he also got to experience all the things he'd dreamed of while trapped in that monstrous form. He got to hold Lyra's hand without worrying about crushing it. He got to kiss her whenever he wanted. He got to wake up next to her and see her smile without the shadow of prophecy hanging over them. They settled in the frontier town, taking odd jobs, protection work, guiding travelers, helping rebuild. People who'd heard the stories sometimes asked if they'd known the beast. Lyra always smiled and said, yes. He was a friend. On quiet nights, they'd sit beneath the stars, the ones Lyra had learned to love again, and talk about everything and nothing. "Do you regret it?" Lyra asked once. "The sacrifice?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I regret that it took dying twice to learn how to live. But regret this?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Never. I'd do it all again." "Even the part where you were a massive, terrifying beast?" "Especially that part." He grinned. "I was very intimidating. You sneezed fire the first time we met. I was establishing dominance." Lyra burst out laughing, the sound bright and free. Ethan watched her with wonder, still amazed that this was real, that he'd been given not just a second chance, but a third. "I love you," he said simply. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you too. Both versions of you. The beast who saved me and the man who chose to stay. They're the same person." "I know," she smiled. "That's why I love you." In the distance, wolves howled, a sound that once would have made Ethan flinch. Now, he just listened peacefully. He'd been a monster, a legend, a prophecy. But in the end, Ethan Hale was simply a man who'd learned what it meant to choose, to fight, to love, to sacrifice, and to live. And that was enough. 2 years later, Aldrich visited them. The former captain had left the military entirely, spending his time ensuring the truth about the prophecy remained public knowledge. He'd aged well, the burden of command replaced by something lighter. "You both look happy," he said, sitting at their small kitchen table while Lyra poured tea. "We are?" Ethan replied simply. There was a scar on his chest, faint but visible, where Draven's blade had struck. Sometimes it ached, especially during storms, but Ethan wore it without shame. "Good. You've earned it." Aldrich accepted his tea with a nod of thanks. "I wanted you to know, there's been talk. Some of the younger knights want to reform the order. Focus on actual protection instead of prophecy chasing." "That's good," Lyra said. "The kingdom needs real heroes." "It has them." Aldrich looked at them both meaningfully, whether they wear the title or not. After he left, Ethan and Lyra stood on their porch watching the sun set over the frontier wilderness. "Do you think we'll ever have a normal life?" Ethan asked. Lyra laced her fingers through his. "This is normal. Our normal." And she was right. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, not in Ethan's first mundane existence, not during Lyra's years of grief-fueled hunting, and certainly not during those strange weeks when a beast and a huntress learned to trust each other. But it was theirs, hard-won, and impossible, but perfect in its imperfection. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Ethan's scar ached. For just a moment he could feel the ghost of his beast form, the weight, the power, the terrible isolation. Then Lyra squeezed his hand and the memory faded. He was just Ethan again. And that was exactly who he wanted to be. Thank you for watching. Please support us by liking, subscribing, and commenting about your favorite characters below.